Hey, welcome to Write It Up, a new podcast series exploring self-publishing and everything you need to know about it. I'm author P.E. Craven, or you can just call me Paige. And here we go. Episode 1. Welcome to the show. Today's episode is why self-publishing. If you are somebody who is an avid reader, if you enjoy reading, if you are on Bookstagram, Book Talk, Facebook, bookish pages, you know that self-publishing is really having a big moment right now. There's loads of self-published authors out there, and there are more and more coming, which is terrific. It's really disrupting the traditional publishing kind of game or the traditional publishing business. It's forcing traditional publishers to reevaluate how they do business and the authors that they represent. So there's a lot of positives that are happening. That said, there's not a lot of resources for self-published authors. Let me rephrase that. There's not a lot of easily accessible resources for self-published authors. I do think most self-published authors are very open to discussing the process and what they've learned with new self-published authors. But sometimes getting up the courage to just cold call or cold message somebody and ask questions is scary. It takes a different kind of courage. This episode and all of the episodes, this podcast is really aimed at helping other people who are wanting to self-publish. They have questions about it. You're curious about it. This is going to hopefully help answer some of those questions. So, why self-publishing? Before we start that, let me introduce myself. I am P.E. Craven, or you can just call me Paige. I wrote these two books. The first in the series is Realm Leaper. The second book is Windwalker. I'm currently working on a separate series called the Tree King series. The first installment of that is called Oak. It is available on Kindle Vella if you're interested or curious. And then the third in the Realm Leaper series is in the works now as well. I've been self-publishing since 2023, so just over a year at this point, but my journey in self-publishing started really in 2020. And I think you will find a lot of self-published authors started in 2020. That was really a big catalyst, I think, for a lot of people, where we had some extra time in our hand. We also were experiencing a lot of trauma and maybe using storytelling too. I was definitely one of those people. I went through a pretty significant life change that started my journey in writing. A little of my background: I was a dance teacher for 10 years. I owned a small business. I was a dance studio owner for a little while, and then 2020 happened and just really shook up everything. My family needed a change. The business was supporting us financially fine, but the needs of the family and my health needs were not being supported in that business. We closed December, I think 10th, in 2020. And then I was jobless for a little while, which was like for me, that was huge because I hadn't been jobless since I was like 15. Even when I didn't have a job, I was doing odd jobs where I was picking up work. I was doing like freelance work where I might come in with catering or something and only work one event. But never was I just without a job, and especially without a job and not a plan too. I spent about 4 months not working, and during that time is when my first novel grew. I just started writing. I had a reoccurring dream, and I had the dream so many times I just thought, let's see if I can write it, and wrote the first chapter in about 10 minutes. And after that, it more became a way to fill time. because I wasn't used to not having a thing to focus on. So that just became my thing that I was focusing on, was just to see if I could write this book. And luckily, a really good friend of mine read the story, and it was really rough. It hadn't been really edited at that point. And she was basically like, you have to publish this. And thus began this journey. During that time, I also went and got my master's in teaching. I spent a few years teaching, and now I'm working full-time as an author. And I also do some freelance writing on the side as well. So that was my story. That's how I got into self-publishing. But there was a lot that I didn't know when I first started. So when I first started on the pathway to publishing, I honestly didn't really know what self-publishing was. I tried traditional publishing, but when I say I tried, I spent less than a month trying it. And the process for that, for anybody that's not familiar with traditional publishing, is you either query, so that's the way you refer to finding a traditional publisher, is you query your novel or your work of writing. The process to traditionally publish is you query, and you either do that directly with the publisher. So let's say Bloomsbury. They will post something that they are open for submissions, and they'll be specific. We are looking for fantasy authors. We are looking for sci-fi young adult authors. They will have a list of things they would like to publish. And if your story hits those marks, then you will send in a letter, and then they'll have a list of requirements that they want with the letter as well. It's called a query letter. A lot of times it's like the first chapter or the first however many words, so they have a word count. But the expectation is that your novel is completely finished. You have finished the story, because if they answer back and say, we are interested, we want to read the whole novel, they want to see a full finished product. They don't want to wait on something to be produced. Now, that's different if you are a proven success, let's say George R.R. Martin, right? If that's who you are, then they might give you an advance for 10 years on a book that might not ever be written. That's a little joke if you are a Game of Thrones fan. So that's the process for traditional querying. The additional step that you could take instead of going directly to the publisher is find a literary agent. And the literary agent then will use their connections to find a publisher that would suit your story. And the process for a literary agent is very similar. Now, a lot of indie authors or self-published authors also have a literary agent, and they help find them opportunities, speaking gigs, signing opportunities. They do press releases and stuff like that. When I was first looking at publishing, to bring it back to that point, I sent maybe 3 query letters and got 3 really positive responses. We really enjoyed this, but it's not what we're looking for right now. And that process was exciting. And again, it was like 3 weeks. But it did help me realize that this is maybe not the way I want to experience publishing. As I started hyperfixating and teaching myself about traditional publishing versus self-publishing, there were a lot of things about self-publishing that really stuck out to me and seemed to really align more with my values and align a little bit more with my personality even, and really got me excited about the process. And that's not to say that traditional publishing wouldn't ever be the correct fit for me, but at that point in time, it 100% was. So here are the reasons why I chose to self-publish, and it might help you decide if self-publishing is the right way for you to go as well. So the number one reason, this is probably the top reason that I self-published over traditional publishing. And that was traditional publishing typically takes way longer to complete. As somebody who is neurodivergent, my fear was through the long process of traditional publishing, I would lose the gas. I would lose steam and the desire to follow through with this. I thrive in really fast-paced, high-pressure environments. I think it's what made me really good at my job for a really long time. But traditional publishing, it can go through 3, 4, 5 rounds of editing. They have press tours, they have a whole process for setting up beta readers and ARC readers, and it's a very long, in-depth process. And some might say, oh, it's not that bad. But for my personality, the more I learned about it, the more I started to think, I don't think that's going to work for me. Ultimately, I decided to self-publish because it just worked better with my schedule. It worked a little bit better with my personality. I liked the fact that I could set the release dates and that I could set the timeline for the process. I finished writing my first novel in 2021, but didn't have it edited until the fall of 2022. And over that period of time, we edited it. We changed some things. My editor is terrific. She's amazing. And then we marketed it. We marketed the novel and then worked on the release from there. So there was a point in time where we had a release date set and then decided that we wanted to push it back. That happens in traditional publishing as well. But at the time, I was working full time. I had a whole other job. And so the stress of trying to get it done by a deadline was relieved a little bit because I knew I had the ultimate decision. I wasn't beholden to stakeholders or a big publishing house or some executives. I was that. And so for the way I operate, that really worked with my personality. The second big reason I went with self-publishing is I am an artist at heart. I have a very long background in artistic production. So as a dance studio owner, as a dance director, I was in charge of the whole operation of Craven Productions, from helping to design the posters, picking out costumes, making headsets, making accessories, doing all the choreography, choosing music, all of that. I was very involved in the whole process of creating these elaborate productions. So with that background, I really wanted to have the ultimate say in artwork for my book covers and style and formatting, marketing choices. Now, the kind of con to that element is that you are in charge of it all. The benefit is you are in charge of it all, but the con is you are in charge of it all. So it's a double-edged sword because the stress and the burden of getting everything pulled together is ultimately up to you. For me, that works. I'm okay with that. That is a task I'm very comfortable accepting, and I enjoy a lot of the formatting. I don't hate editing. It's not my favorite part, but I don't hate editing. I don't dislike the design portion and the marketing portion. So for me, it works really well. I touched on this previously, but what I learned in my research was that the scheduling of being a self-published author, worked better for my schedule. While I was self-publishing my first novel and my second novel, I was a full-time teacher in a high school. I taught ELA, which is, I know, it's very cliche, but it was very enjoyable while I was there. That's a pretty, I'm going to say, high stress, high commitment job. And when we were going through the editing process, when we were going through the process of launching the book and all of that, I was able to work everything around my work schedule and the needs of my family. If my kids had an event, I was able to step away and focus on that. Let's say if one of my kids were sick, I was able to step away and focus on that because I knew I had the freedom to change a deadline if I needed to change it. I don't know personally if, let's say, a traditional publishing house, if you come to them and say, oh, I missed this deadline because both my kids were sick, I don't know how forgiving they would be with that. But that element of stress of not knowing kept me at bay from pursuing that path. I was really drawn to that idea of being in charge of my schedule. Again, for me, self-publishing really gave me the feeling of freedom in that. Now, you have to be able to set your own deadlines and stick to them if you're self-publishing. But again, deadlines sometimes have to change depending on what your life looks like. And I think that's a really important aspect of being a successful creative, is that you allow life to happen and you respond the way that you need to respond. So it, for me, was definitely a benefit. I also think going through the self-publishing process definitely helped me learn more about the publishing business. There were a lot of elements about publishing that I really didn't understand, even with the research I did before I began the process. There was elements to the marketing, elements to the formatting, what is traditional in certain genres. There were a lot of opportunities to learn specifically about the business of publishing. A lot of what I found was really fascinating. On the flip side, there were elements that were shocking that it was normalized. And we'll get into that. I eventually would like to do an episode about traditional publishing versus self-publishing, what is really happening with the disruption of traditional publishing, and some of the aspects that self-publishing is bringing to the forefront of what has been traditional in the past. But I didn't learn that. I don't know that I would have fully learned all about that had I gone traditional publishing. So I really appreciated the perspective that it gave me. It gave me a really great perspective of the publishing industry and the process of it, what actually goes into it. Also, I think another big draw to self-publishing for me was the fact that at my heart, at my root of myself, I desire to be an entrepreneur. I see myself as a creator. I see myself as an artist. I see myself as my own boss. If you're into astrology, I've got an Aries sun and Aries moon. So leadership is pretty important to me, but also I don't really like being told what to do. So being in self-publishing, being a self-published author gives me the chance to be my own boss and to be an entrepreneur. When I stepped away from my small business in 2020, that was an end of a career. That was most definitely the end of a career for me. But it did not end my pursuit for being a professional creative. And with that, at the core of every professional creative, I definitely think is that entrepreneurial spirit, where you want to create and then get it out to the world. And so self-publishing really is a great avenue for somebody who wants to be a professional creative, who wants to be in charge of their own business and doesn't necessarily want to be in an office, in a brick and mortar type business, or even really doing services for a lot of different people. This gives me the opportunity to have a business, because selling my books is a business, and then be in charge of my own schedule. It gives me the flexibility to respond to life the way that I need to, and still strive for success and opportunity. And I've loved the opportunities that I've had that have been given to me from self-publishing and being my own boss, which is, I know that's, I don't know. I feel like, oh yeah, be your own boss has gotten cheapened by the MLMs, but I think it is an important aspect to the self-publishing process. If you are not somebody who is comfortable setting firm boundaries for yourself, this might not be the best opportunity for you. You do need to be able to set boundaries for yourself and set deadlines and hold yourself accountable when things go great and when things don't go great. And part of that is being reflective and being willing to learn. But if those are things that are high value items for you, self-publishing might be the right option. My story, that is the reason for self-publishing. In teaching, we say, what's your why? That's my why. My why is it really suits my personality. It gives me a chance to be an entrepreneur. It lets me pursue my own artistic visions without feeling like I have to fall into a category that some executive has demanded of me. I'm the executive. I get to decide what creative vision we're going for. And what's really interesting is more and more people are going, more and more writers are going for self-publishing for those reasons. And traditional publishing is having to respond. They are now responding to the surge of people who are self-publishing. And not only that, but the people who are consuming self-published books. I think at the crux of it is the consumers that are really making a difference. So the more that you consume self-published works, the more the traditional publishing houses are going to have to respond as well. So that wraps it up for our first episode of Write It Up. I've really enjoyed this chat. If you enjoyed this, if you have comments or questions, you can leave them in the comment section. I will also post parts of this on my Instagram. But I am so excited about this series and cannot wait to dive into more. See you next time.